The afternoon sun hung low over the dusty frontier settlement, casting long shadows across the wooden buildings that lined the single muddy street. Wagons creaked as they rolled past, horses snorted impatiently, and the dry wind carried the smell of dust, leather, and campfire smoke. Merchants shouted prices, travelers hurried through town, and curious onlookers gathered around a small platform near the trading post. It was not a day for celebration. A young girl, no older than 13, stood alone on the wooden platform. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her faded dress. Her light brown hair was tangled from days of travel, and streaks of dirt covered her tear-stained face. She looked out at the crowd with frightened eyes, searching for a familiar face that never appeared. Only a week earlier, she had been traveling west with her family in a wagon train, dreaming of a new beginning. They had hoped to build a small farm and start a peaceful life. But fate had taken a cruel turn. A violent storm scattered the wagons, and in the confusion, she became separated from her parents. Despite desperate searches, no one found them. Alone and without money, she wandered for days until a trader discovered her near the edge of the desert. Instead of helping her reunite with her family, he brought her to the frontier town, intending to profit from her misfortune. Now she stood before strangers who looked at her as though she were nothing more than another item to be bought and sold. The trader stepped forward and cleared his throat loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "here is a healthy, hard-working girl. Strong enough to cook, clean, and help around any household." The words made her stomach twist. She wasn't a possession. She wasn't merchandise. She was simply a frightened child. The people in the crowd whispered among themselves. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed curious. A few avoided meeting her eyes altogether. The girl swallowed hard, trying to stay brave, but fear tightened around her heart. Every passing second made the nightmare feel more real. As the trader prepared to begin taking offers, panic overwhelmed her. "Please," she whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. No one responded. Her voice cracked as tears filled her eyes. "Please, don't do that." This time the words carried across the silent crowd. Several people shifted uneasily. An elderly woman lowered her gaze. A father standing with his young son quietly turned away. But no one stepped forward. The trader frowned impatiently. "This isn't your decision," he said sharply. "You'll go wherever the buyer takes you." The girl felt as though the world had stopped. She closed her eyes, wishing she could wake from the terrible dream. The trader raised his hand. "Let's begin." Before anyone could answer, a figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. He wore buckskin clothing decorated with careful beadwork, and his long dark hair was tied neatly behind his shoulders. His calm expression contrasted with the nervous whispers spreading through the gathering. Some townspeople stepped back as they recognized him as an Apache warrior. Many in town had only heard stories about the Apache, some true, many exaggerated. Fear and misunderstanding had shaped their opinions long before they had ever met one. The warrior ignored the whispers. His attention rested only on the frightened girl. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked into her tear-filled eyes. He saw not an object. Not a bargain. Not a servant. He saw a child who had lost everything. The trader noticed him and forced a smile. "Interested?" he asked. The warrior slowly reached into the small leather pouch hanging from his belt. He counted the few coins inside. It wasn't much. In fact, it appeared to be everything he carried. He placed a single silver dollar into the trader's outstretched hand. "I'll take her," he said quietly. Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd. $1, someone scoffed. "That's all she's worth." Another man shrugged. The trader accepted it. The trader examined the coin carefully before slipping it into his pocket. "Done," he announced. The girl felt her knees weaken. Her heart pounded harder than ever. She had been sold. She couldn't understand why this stranger had chosen her or what awaited her beyond the edge of town. Fear filled every thought. The Apache warrior approached slowly, careful not to frighten her further. He did not grab her arm. He did not shout. He simply stood a respectful distance away. When she finally looked up at him, she expected anger or coldness. Instead, she found calm, steady eyes filled with quiet compassion. Without speaking another word, he gently motioned toward the road leading away from the town. The girl hesitated. Behind her was the place where no one had come to help. Ahead lay an uncertain future with a complete stranger. Taking a slow, trembling breath, she stepped down from the platform. The crowd watched in silence as the unlikely pair walked toward the open desert, disappearing into the golden light of the setting sun. None of the townspeople could have imagined that the man who had paid only $1 had no intention of owning the girl. His purpose was something entirely different. As the sun dipped below the distant hills, the Apache warrior and the frightened girl walked silently away from the frontier town. Behind them, the voices of the townspeople slowly faded until only the sound of the evening wind remained. The dusty road stretched before them, leading into a vast landscape of rolling hills, scattered cacti, and towering rock formations painted orange by the setting sun. The girl kept several steps behind the warrior. Every story she had ever heard about the Apache echoed in her mind. Travelers passing through her family's camp had often spoken of conflict on the frontier, but she had never met an Apache person herself. Fear filled the empty spaces where knowledge should have been. She expected harsh words, rough treatment, or demands that she obey. Instead, the warrior simply walked at a steady pace, never looking back to hurry her. When they reached a small stream, he stopped. Without saying a word, he knelt beside the clear water, filled a wooden cup, and placed it on a nearby rock. Then he stepped away, giving her space. The girl hesitated. She had been thirsty all day, but suspicion held her back. Finally, unable to ignore her thirst any longer, she cautiously picked up the cup and drank. The cool water soothed her dry throat. It was the first act of kindness anyone had shown her since she had become separated from her family. The warrior waited patiently until she finished. Then he pointed toward a narrow trail winding through the hills, and together they continued their journey. Back in town, however, the story of the $1 purchase spread quickly. Inside the crowded saloon, people argued over what had happened. "I told you something wasn't right," one man said as he set down his mug. "He bought her," another replied. "That makes her his responsibility now." An elderly blacksmith shook his head. "I don't know," he said thoughtfully. "Did you notice the way he looked at the girl? There wasn't any cruelty in his eyes." A younger man laughed. "You can't know what he's planning." Others nodded uncertainly. Rumors grew larger with every retelling. Some insisted the girl would never be seen again. Others believed the warrior intended to make her work in his camp. Few admitted that none of them actually knew. The truth had already become buried beneath assumptions. Far from the town, darkness settled across the desert. The Apache warrior stopped near a sheltered group of rocks where a small fire pit had clearly been used before. He gathered a few dry branches while the girl stood quietly nearby, unsure whether she was allowed to move. Within minutes, a small fire crackled to life. The warm glow pushed back the cool evening air. From a leather bag, the warrior removed a piece of dried meat, some roasted corn, and a small pouch of berries. Instead of eating first, he placed the food on a flat stone and gently slid it toward the girl. She stared at the meal. "Why?" she asked softly. The warrior looked at her for a moment before answering. "Because you are hungry." His voice was calm and gentle. No anger. No threats. Just a simple answer. The girl slowly accepted the food. It had been days since she had eaten a proper meal. She thanked him in a barely audible whisper. He simply nodded. The two sat on opposite sides of the fire in silence. Above them, countless stars appeared one by one, filling the night sky with brilliant light. For the first time in days, the girl's breathing began to slow. Yet fear still lingered. After a long silence, she gathered the courage to ask the question that had haunted her ever since leaving town. "What are you going to make me do?" The warrior looked into the flames before answering. "Tonight," he said, "you will eat, rest, and sleep." She frowned. "And tomorrow?" "We will see tomorrow when it comes." His answer puzzled her. She had expected orders. Instead, she found patience. As the fire burned lower, he spread an extra blanket on the ground several feet from where he intended to sleep. He placed another folded blanket beside it. "You may sleep there," he said. The girl looked around nervously. "Aren't you afraid I'll run away?" The warrior smiled faintly. "If you choose to leave, I will not chase you." She couldn't understand. Nothing about this man matched the frightening stories she had heard. For several minutes, she remained awake, watching him from across the dying fire. He quietly sharpened a small knife for camp chores, then wrapped it safely and placed it beside his own blanket before lying down. He made no attempt to come closer. No attempt to frighten her. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear. The girl wrapped herself in the blanket and drifted into the first peaceful sleep she had experienced since losing her family. Long before sunrise, the warrior quietly added wood to the fire and prepared a simple breakfast. As the first rays of light reached the valley, the girl awoke to the smell of warm bread cooking over the coals. For the first time since her terrible journey had begun, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Not complete trust. Not happiness. But the smallest spark of hope. She still did not know why the Apache warrior had spent his last dollar to take her away from the trading post. She only knew that, so far, every fear she had carried with her had been met not with cruelty, but with unexpected kindness. And that realization would begin to change everything. The first light of dawn spread across the desert, turning the rocky hills shades of gold and amber. Birds called from nearby trees, and a cool breeze carried the fresh scent of sage through the quiet valley. The girl slowly opened her eyes, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then she remembered. She was far from the frontier town, far from the platform where she had stood in fear, and far from the only life she had ever known. Across the small campfire, the Apache warrior was already awake. He had rekindled the fire and baked simple flatbread on a smooth stone. Beside it sat a wooden cup filled with fresh water. When he noticed she was awake, he gave a small nod. "Good morning," he said. His voice remained calm and gentle. The girl sat up cautiously. "You made breakfast?" she asked. He smiled slightly. "For both of us." She accepted the warm bread with hesitant hands. It was soft, fresh, and far better than anything she had eaten in days. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt frightening. Instead, it felt peaceful. After they finished eating, the warrior packed their few belongings into a leather bag. "We have a little farther to travel," he said. The girl nodded. This time, she walked beside him instead of several steps behind. The narrow trail wound through rocky cliffs before opening into a broad valley surrounded by cottonwood trees. In the distance, smoke rose gently into the morning sky. As they drew closer, the girl noticed small homes built with natural materials blending into the landscape. Children laughed as they played near the creek, while women prepared food over cooking fires. Men repaired tools and cared for horses. This was the Apache camp. The girl's heartbeat quickened. She expected people to stare at her or treat her as an outsider. Instead, something completely different happened. A young boy spotted the warrior first. "He has returned," the boy shouted happily. Several people looked up from their work. An elderly woman approached with a warm smile. She spoke briefly with the warrior in their own language before turning toward the girl. Though they shared no common words, the woman gently placed a hand over her heart and smiled kindly. The simple gesture made the girl's shoulders relax. Soon another woman brought a clean blanket. A teenage girl, about the same age as the visitor, stepped forward carrying a small basket filled with berries. She offered it with a shy smile. The frightened girl hesitated only for a moment before accepting. "Thank you," she whispered. Although the young Apache girl did not understand the words, she understood the meaning. She smiled back. Throughout the day, the visitor watched life in the camp. Children gathered firewood together. Families shared meals. Elders told stories beneath the shade of large trees. Everyone seemed to have responsibilities, but no one shouted or treated one another with cruelty. The warrior introduced her to no one as property. He never referred to her as someone he owned. Instead, he simply ensured she had food, clean water, and a safe place to rest. That afternoon, the elderly woman invited the girl into her home. Inside, she carefully washed the dust from the girl's face and gently brushed the knots from her tangled hair. She even offered clean clothes that had belonged to a granddaughter. As the girl looked at her reflection in a bowl of clear water, she barely recognized herself. For the first time in weeks, she looked like a child again instead of someone struggling merely to survive. Later, while sitting beneath a cottonwood tree, she finally gathered the courage to ask the Apache warrior the question that had remained in her heart. "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he answered. "When I was a boy, sickness came to our village." His eyes remained fixed on the distant mountains. "I lost my younger sister." The girl listened silently. She was frightened, he continued softly. "People tried to help, but it was too late." He looked toward her. "When I saw you standing alone yesterday, I remembered her." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "You reminded me of your sister." He nodded. No child should stand alone while adults decide her future. His words settled deep within her heart. For the first time, she realized why he had stepped forward in the trading post. Not because he wanted to own her. Not because he expected something in return. But because he could not bear to watch another frightened child lose her chance at a safe life. That evening, the entire camp gathered around a large fire. Music filled the air as drums echoed softly beneath the stars. Children laughed while elders shared stories of courage, family, and hope. The warrior invited the girl to join them. She hesitated only briefly before sitting beside the elderly woman who had cared for her. Someone handed her a warm bowl of stew. Another offered fresh bread. No one treated her like a prisoner. No one expected payment for their kindness. As the flames danced into the night sky, the girl looked around the circle. Only yesterday she had believed every frightening rumor she had ever heard. Now she saw families who loved one another, neighbors who shared what little they had, and strangers who had welcomed her without demanding anything in return. For the first time since losing her parents, the heavy weight in her heart began to lift. She still didn't know what the future held. She didn't know whether her family was alive or whether she would ever see them again. But one truth had become impossible to ignore. The man who had purchased her for $1 had never intended to own her. He had rescued her. And in doing so, he had given her something far more valuable than money. He had given her hope. Several days passed in the Apache camp, and with each sunrise the girl's fear faded a little more. She had begun to help with simple chores, carrying water from the creek, gathering firewood with the children, and assisting the women as they prepared meals. No one ordered her to work. Whenever she offered to help, they thanked her with warm smiles. The kindness she received felt almost unreal. One quiet evening, after supper, the Apache warrior sat alone on a large rock overlooking the valley. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson, while a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood trees. The girl walked over slowly. "May I sit here?" she asked. The warrior nodded. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the sun sink below the mountains. Finally, the girl broke the silence. "There's something I still don't understand." He turned toward her. "You paid $1 for me." She lowered her eyes. "Everyone in town believed you bought me." The warrior looked out across the valley again. "I know. Then, why haven't you treated me like someone you own?" A gentle smile appeared on his face. "Because no one can own another person." The words caught her by surprise. She stared at him, waiting for him to continue. "My father taught me something when I was young," he said. "He told me that every person is born with a spirit that belongs only to the Creator. No coin, no promise, and no piece of paper can change that." The girl listened carefully. "When I reached the trading post," he continued, "I saw fear in your eyes. I knew that if someone with cruel intentions bought you, your life might become filled with suffering." She remembered the crowd, the whispers, and the helpless feeling of standing alone on the platform. "So," she whispered, "you didn't buy me because you wanted me?" "No. You bought me to save me." He nodded. "I gave the trader his dollar because it was the only way to stop him." The girl felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought everyone had abandoned me." The warrior's expression softened. "No child should believe that." For several minutes they sat in silence. At last, the girl asked the question that had remained hidden deep inside her heart. "What happens now?" The warrior reached into the small leather pouch hanging from his belt. From inside, he removed a folded piece of cloth. Carefully unwrapping it, he revealed a delicate pendant carved from smooth stone. It was shaped like an eagle with its wings spread wide. "My sister made this many years ago," he said quietly. "I've carried it ever since." He placed it gently in the girl's hands. She looked at him in surprise. "I can't take this." "You can. But it belongs to your family." He smiled. "Now it belongs to someone who needs to remember she is free." The girl's hands trembled as she held the pendant. No one had given her a gift since she had lost her parents. "This eagle," the warrior explained, "flies where it chooses. No cage can hold it for long. Whenever you look at it, remember that your future belongs to you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She could not find the words to thank him. The warrior stood and looked toward the stars beginning to appear above the valley. "There is something else you should know." She wiped her eyes. "I have been asking travelers about your family." Her heart skipped. "You have?" He nodded. "A trading caravan passed nearby yesterday. They told me that survivors from the wagon train were taken to a mission several days east of here." The girl's breath caught. "My parents. I do not know if they are there." Hope and fear battled inside her. "But there is a chance." The warrior looked directly at her. "When the time is right, I will take you there." "You would do that for me?" "Of course." She stared at him in disbelief. "But then? You'll leave?" He nodded without hesitation. The answer confused her. "Aren't you afraid you'll never see me again?" He smiled gently. "If I truly wanted to help you, I must also be willing to let you go." Those words settled deeply into her heart. She realized that real kindness expected nothing in return. The following morning, the entire camp gathered to prepare for the journey east. The elderly woman packed food into a woven basket. The children tucked dried berries inside for the road. The young girl who had first welcomed the visitor hugged her tightly before placing a small woven bracelet around her wrist. Although they spoke different languages, no words were needed. Friendship had grown between them. As the sun rose above the mountains, the Apache warrior saddled 2 horses. The girl looked back one last time at the camp that had become a place of safety during the darkest days of her life. Only a week earlier, she had believed she was being led into captivity. Instead, she had found compassion, dignity, and people who reminded her that humanity could be found in unexpected places. Clutching the eagle pendant close to her heart, she climbed onto her horse. Together, she and the warrior rode toward the eastern horizon, carrying with them a single hope, that somewhere beyond the distant hills, her family might still be waiting. The journey east took several days. The Apache warrior and the young girl traveled through wide valleys, across shallow rivers, and over rocky mountain trails. During the day, the sun warmed the land, while cool nights brought brilliant stars that stretched across the sky. Each morning they packed their small camp before sunrise. Each evening they rested near a stream or beneath a cluster of tall trees. The girl no longer walked in fear. She rode beside the warrior, asking questions about the land, the animals, and the people who called the mountains home. He answered patiently. He taught her how to recognize fresh animal tracks in the sand, how to find clean water by watching birds, and how to tell the direction of the wind by the movement of the grass. "You notice everything," she said one afternoon. He smiled. "The land speaks. You only have to learn how to listen." As the days passed, they spoke more freely. The girl told him stories about her family. She described her father's laugh, her mother's warm bread, and the songs they sang around their campfire while traveling west. Sometimes she smiled while remembering. Sometimes she cried. Whenever tears came, the warrior never rushed her. He simply remained nearby until she was ready to continue. Late on the fourth afternoon, they climbed a ridge overlooking a broad valley. In the distance stood several white buildings surrounded by wooden fences. Smoke rose from chimneys, and people moved about the grounds. The warrior stopped his horse. "The mission is there," he said quietly. The girl's heart began to race. She stared at the buildings. "What if they're not there?" He looked at her kindly. "Then we keep searching. And, what if they are? Then your journey home begins." She took a deep breath and nodded. Together, they rode toward the settlement. As they approached, several workers noticed them and came forward. One of the older men greeted them cautiously before his eyes fell upon the frightened girl. "You've brought someone here," he said. The warrior explained, through gestures and the help of a translator who knew a little of both languages, that the girl had become separated from her family during the storm. The workers immediately searched their records and spoke with the families staying at the mission. The waiting felt endless. The girl stood silently beside her horse, clutching the eagle pendant beneath her jacket. Every passing minute seemed longer than the last. Then, from across the courtyard, a woman suddenly froze. She stared at the girl. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "My child," the woman cried. The girl's eyes widened. "Mother." She ran across the yard as fast as she could. Her mother rushed toward her, tears streaming down her face. They embraced tightly, neither willing to let go. Moments later, her father appeared from another building. He stopped in disbelief before running to join them. The family held one another as tears of joy replaced weeks of sorrow. People throughout the mission quietly watched the emotional reunion. Many wiped away tears of their own. The girl finally looked back toward the Apache warrior. He remained standing beside his horse, saying nothing. A gentle smile rested on his face. Her father walked over to him. Although they spoke different languages, gratitude needed no translation. The father placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head respectfully. The warrior returned the gesture. The girl's mother stepped forward next. She held her daughter's hands tightly before turning toward the man who had protected her. Through the translator, she said softly, "You saved our daughter." The warrior shook his head. "I only gave her the chance to find her way home." The girl stepped closer. "I don't know how to thank you." He reached into one of his saddlebags and removed a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. Inside was a beautifully woven blanket made by the women in his village. "They wanted you to have this," he said. "So you'll remember that you have friends beyond these mountains." The girl gently accepted the gift. "I'll never forget any of you." The warrior smiled. "I know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the girl removed the eagle pendant from around her neck. "I should give this back." He gently closed her hand around it. "No. But it belongs to your sister." It belonged to her. He looked toward the sky. "Now it belongs to someone who understands its meaning." The girl nodded as fresh tears filled her eyes. "I'll treasure it forever." The sun was beginning to set when the warrior prepared to leave. He climbed onto his horse and adjusted the reins. The girl hurried forward one last time. "Will I ever see you again?" He smiled warmly. "The world is full of long roads." Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Sometimes they cross again." With one final wave, he turned his horse toward the western mountains. The girl watched until he became a small figure against the golden horizon. She realized something important. The man who had spent his last dollar to rescue a frightened stranger had asked for nothing in return. He had not sought praise. He had not expected a reward. His greatest satisfaction came from seeing a family reunited. As darkness settled over the valley, the girl stood beside her parents, holding the eagle pendant in one hand and the woven blanket in the other. She knew that while she had found her way home, a part of her heart would always remember the quiet Apache warrior whose kindness had changed her life forever, many years past. The frightened girl who had once stood alone on a wooden platform in a dusty frontier town was now a confident young woman. Time had healed many of the wounds left by the terrible journey that had separated her from her family, but she never forgot the quiet Apache warrior who had changed the course of her life with one simple act of compassion. She still carried the small stone eagle pendant every day. Whenever she held it in her hand, she remembered his words. "No one can own another person." Those words became the foundation of the life she chose to build. After returning to her family, she devoted herself to learning. She became a teacher in a small frontier community, believing that education could replace fear with understanding. She encouraged her students to ask questions, to think for themselves, and never to judge others based only on rumors or stories. Whenever the children spoke harshly about people they had never met, she would gently remind them, the truth is often found in kindness, not in fear. Her classroom became known as a place where every child was welcome. One autumn afternoon, a young student raised his hand after class. "Miss," he asked, "why do you always wear that eagle pendant?" She looked down at the smooth stone hanging from its leather cord and smiled. "It reminds me of someone who taught me what true courage looks like." The children gathered closer, eager to hear the story. She told them about the storm that had separated her from her family. She described the frightening day she stood alone on the platform in the trading post and the moment she whispered, "Please, don't do that." She explained how the crowd had assumed the worst when an Apache warrior stepped forward and paid $1 to stop the sale. The children listened without interrupting. Then she told them what happened next. "He didn't treat me like property," she said softly. "He gave me food when I was hungry. He gave me water when I was thirsty. He gave me safety when I was afraid. And when he had the chance to keep me with him, he instead helped me find my family." One little girl frowned thoughtfully. "So, he never wanted anything in return?" The teacher smiled. "No. He believed that helping someone was reward enough." The classroom remained silent. Many of the children had never heard a story like that before. Years later, the woman decided to return to the valley where the Apache camp had once stood. She hoped to thank the people who had cared for her during the darkest days of her childhood. The journey took nearly a week. As she approached the familiar valley, memories flooded back. She recognized the winding creek, the cottonwood trees, and the towering cliffs glowing beneath the afternoon sun. But the camp itself had changed. Some families had moved elsewhere over the years. Others remained. An elderly woman sitting beneath a tree looked up as the visitor approached. The woman studied her face for a long moment. Then her eyes widened with recognition. Slowly, she smiled. The visitor smiled back. Although many years had passed, they embraced like old friends. Through younger members of the community who could translate, she learned that the Apache warrior had continued helping travelers whenever he could. He had guided lost families through dangerous mountain passes. He had rescued children during floods. He had settled disputes peacefully whenever possible. He had become known not for his strength in battle, but for his wisdom and compassion. The visitor's eyes filled with tears. "Where is he now?" she asked quietly. The elder looked toward the distant mountains. "He walked on many winters ago." The words were gentle. The young woman lowered her head. She had hoped to thank him one last time. Instead, she stood silently beneath the evening sky. After a long moment, she walked to a nearby hill overlooking the valley. She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers beneath a young cottonwood tree. Holding the eagle pendant in her hand, she whispered, "Thank you." The breeze stirred the leaves above her, as if carrying her words across the mountains. Before leaving, she made a promise to herself. She would continue sharing his story, not because he had wanted recognition, but because acts of kindness deserved to be remembered. Over the years, countless students heard the tale of the Apache warrior who spent his last dollar to rescue a frightened stranger. Many of those children grew into adults who chose compassion over prejudice, understanding over fear, and generosity over selfishness. The story spread from one town to another, not as a legend about a great warrior, but as the memory of an ordinary man who made an extraordinary choice. His greatest victory had never been won with a weapon. It had been won with mercy. And long after both of them were gone, people still remembered the lesson that began with a frightened girl's plea and a single silver dollar. Because true strength is not measured by power, wealth, or fame. It is measured by the lives we choose to protect, the strangers we choose to help, and the kindness we leave behind for future generations.